Hi, everyone. Welcome to my session, Breaking Up is Hard to Do, where I'm going to talk about Happy Soup and breaking up into unlocked packages. My name is Richard Clark. I work for Provar Testing. And a thank you to our sponsors as well today for making the event happen. So the too long didn't read. Why should you care about Happy Soup? Why would you want to break it up? I'm going to cover about what that Happy Soup is, the reasons to break it up and the benefits. I'm going to do a very quick coverage on second generation packaging, mainly focusing on unlocked packages for today. But really, I'm going to dive into things like org shape and source tracking, package XML, and dependency management as well. I'm actually going to use a real case study, my own experience with Provar's trial and license automation that I developed on our org. And we're going to look at ways in which I tried to turn that into packages using the unlocked packages, what was before Spring 21 independent packages that could be installed to any org, or the Spring 21 dependent packages is what I've used in my solution today. So what flavor is Happy Soup and where would you buy one? Well, what I'm talking about is the stuff on the left of your screen here. So this is from the Trailhead module, Break Up Your Metadata. We're talking about all the changes that you've gathered over time in your org. So even if you're using source tracking, everything really lives in your org, all those modules, all those teams that you've automated within Salesforce. However, if you do like the t-shirt, feel free to go across to Todd's shirtforce.org and make a donation and they'll send you a t-shirt. So if your soup is happy, why would you want to break it up? So in our big box, we've got our circles, our triangles, and our squares, and each of these could have disparate stakeholders. And when we're doing releases into an org, we probably need the approval of all the people of our center of excellence or all our stakeholders to agree that a change can be made. You're probably finding change management is starting to hold you back as you add more teams into your Salesforce org. So if we can break the ownership for those elements, that configuration and that code out into separate packages, then we can have separate change teams. So we can isolate changes and have a different release cadence for each of those modules. So that lets us speed up change delivery. We're not waiting for that big release at the end of the month. Maybe like one team is making changes weekly. I can run parallel Scrum teams as well if I've got enough resources. So one team could be working on circles, another team can be working on squares, another on triangles at the same time. And in real life, we're probably talking about things like sales automation, service automation, and maybe your community, each having different owners. That means you can release more often to please your users. It also means you have reduced governance risk. When you're making a change, you're only making it within that small package. You're not changing the whole org. And that also means reduced regression risk, which is always a good thing. So what's been stopping us breaking up a Happy Soup so far? So it's quite difficult to separate your Happy Soup, and that's for a number of reasons. These are the three ones I've called out. Firstly, the business case. Who's going to benefit? Okay. Ultimately, it's yourself and your fellow sales professionals who are going to benefit from doing this by having changes owned by an individual team or an individual group of people. Who's going to pay for it? Well, that's difficult to say. Ultimately, the stakeholders are paying for it. Why would they pay for it? So you have to answer that question. Someone's going to ask you, well, if it's not broke today, why would I fix it? So you're going to have to explain why the benefits are going to be realized by them. Someone else is probably going to say, oh, no, we're not going to make changes. All works today, regression risk. I don't want to do that. So again, you need to convince that person. And then finally, you've got the person who understands what you're trying to do, likes it, approves it, and then wants a guarantee of how much faster your delivery cycle will be, how many more story points you can deliver, how the team's velocity is going to improve. And you can't answer this until you've been through it. Hopefully from the session today, I'll help you be able to answer those questions or at least demonstrate to people the benefits. Once you've got your business case approved, you then start looking at your Happy Soup, your org, and you start realizing there's a whole load of dependencies you hadn't realized. And that includes things like code and config that extends packages that you've installed. So maybe you've got a button to launch a Conga document within your Flexi page that you've customized. Maybe you've got a business process that's linked in with your flow. Even once you haven't got any ISV dependencies, you've almost certainly built dependencies in your own customization and code. We're always conscious that we're trying to have one flow or one Apex trigger per object. Well, within there, you're doing multiple things for different teams. And then even once you've resolved those, you've got circular references. And those circular references may be you have an Apex class A that calls Apex class B, that calls Apex class C, that calls Apex class A again. Now that's bad practice, but it does happen and it happens a lot. And there are techniques you can use, such as dependency injection, which Philip Ozil and Andy Fawcett have talks on Developer Force, which you can look at, which are very good, but it means rewriting code that introduces extra risk. The other option you have is to decouple your transactions. So using things like platform events, we can have multiple things fire asynchronously from one another. So those are things you can do to reduce those circular references. Thirdly, it's knowing what to extract. What do you put in your package? Now, life used to be very simple. We used to just have one metadata API. Yes, okay, it used to take out all your metadata. It used to have a problem with the profiles and permission sets when you were redeploying in terms of field level security. It kind of worked, and there was only one option. Since DX came about, we've had the source tracking option, which resolves a lot of the issues with the metadata API. But you've now got two different source formats. You can't use both. You need to switch to one to the other. And using that source format and using DX, you're going to invariably get retrieve errors. And it's a specialist skill to understand what those errors are. Are they simply just the version you're using of the API? Or is there a real problem, a real dependency you need to sort out? So there's a skill and there's a learning curve involved. I wish, and I say to myself every time I come across these problems, why can't I just extract all my metadata in source format? There is no magic button for this. So you just have to get over it and get on with it. So I'm going to go a bit overboard on the soup analogy today, but bear with me. This is a recipe for minestrone soup from the BBC Good Food website. Minestrone is probably my least favorite soup, but I quite like the look of this one, and I might actually try it. But if we look at this happy soup, we've got ingredients, and on that ingredients list, we've got raw ingredients, okay, customization. I can put extra celery in, extra garlic, extra onion if I want to. And I've got packaged ingredients. And this is a professional chef recipe. So even within here, I've got packages and raw ingredients. And this is what we're talking about. This is what we're going to aim to do today, is take our happy soup and understand that list of ingredients, what's in the package and what's going to be within the org. So in order to do that, there's three ways you can undertake this. The first one is you might fetch all your metadata and then try and break all of it into packages. I guarantee you're going to fail at that, because I did, and it's just an impossible task, and you'll spend forever doing it, rewriting your code and never getting a package out. Or you could choose to package just the new functionality. And initially this seems to work. So maybe you develop one new Apex class, you put it in a package, and that'll be fine. It will work absolutely okay. But then you extend that. Then maybe you're depending on something in that org, so you have to put in another class. Then you put in another custom object. And before you know it, you've got a very untidy happy soup. Your soup's no longer happy. And then you've got a very untidy package as well. And you're owning things you didn't want to own. So that really doesn't work. General opinion is that you should identify the atomic apps or features you want to package and then iterate over time. So separate them, look at the dependency boundaries. And that's the way most people would say you want to break up your happy soup. So what we're trying to do here is shrink the problem. We're taking all that unpackaged metadata. We're still going to have some unpackaged metadata, but alongside, we're gradually going to add applications that take that and transform it and allow teams to own that individual application. So when I make a change to application 1, I don't have to worry about breaking application 2, 3, or 4 or anything in the happy soup. So this is my real case study. I've been doing this. This is a simplification for our own org. Within here, I've got sales automation. I've got service automation. In fact, my talk last year at London's Calling, 6 Secrets of Service Cloud Success, was based on that org. I've got Slack automation, which again, I did at Cactus Force and other talks. So we've got when opportunities close 1, we've got a message goes out into Slack. And I've actually already packaged that one. We've got renewals automation. We've got customer community. We've got Opinium for our learning management system. But what I wanted to do is all the other stuff I want to leave alone. We've outsourced the admin and management and development of our org, but there's areas that I'm interested in as a product owner that I want to work on around our trial automation and license management. And that's working with things like a DX package, it's working with an AWS service. So it's complex stuff that I don't want to give to a third party to work on. So we'll look at how I managed to break this out, the application I'd already written, and break it out and turn it into a package. Main focus today is unlocked packaging. And I always say about unlocked packaging and packaging in general, this is source-driven development the right way. There's nothing new about this. This is how everyone else does source-driven development for the last 30 years or more. Whenever you're building unlocked or managed packages, you have the same elements. You have namespaces, you have versioning, you have upgrade and downgrade ability. And these are the benefits of packaging, the ability to roll back a change rather than fix and go forward that we used to do. Unlocked packages are intended for target end customers because your changes are unrestricted after you deploy them. So someone can go in and make a hot fix in production to a change that you've deployed. If you put your application in a managed package, then you're restricting what people can do and what they can see. You're protecting your intellectual property. And that's normally used by ISV and App Exchange developers, although we will talk today about the use of a managed package for some internal end customer usage as well. A big change from first and second generation packaging is the use of namespaces. So I want to be really clear on this. In first generation packages, we used namespaces and they basically said what the package name was. Please don't think of it that way anymore. A namespace now represents a publisher. So you want to try and use a single namespace for all your packages, unless you deliberately want to separate them and have no interaction. If you do have multiple packages and they do share a namespace, then the namespace accessible annotation is there to make your Apex methods visible, unless you want to use a global access modifier. Now, one of the challenges I had first was extracting source from that org that I showed you. And I was confused by the different numbers of commands I could use with SFDX. And there are several ways, and I've summarized them here for you, so hopefully they'll be clear. If I've got my source code in a production or a developer edition org, then I can extract that using the metadata API commands, okay? And that will put it back in the old metadata API format, and then I can convert it into the new source format that DX uses, because I need everything in that format if I'm going to use second generation packaging. I can't use the old API format. Now, to control what I extract, you can use either a first generation package and say, look, this package here is the thing I want to extract, or you can use a package.xml. And those are things that anyone working with those orgs and first generation packaging and deployments will be familiar with. Now, the other thing I can do is if I've got source in a sandbox, I can still use those MD API commands if I want to, but actually there was a new command added last year, the source retrieve command. So what I can now do is actually extract source natively in the source format. It's not quite the magic button I wanted, get all my source, but it lets me extract specific elements. So what I can do with that command is I can specify maybe an Apex class that I want, a specific Apex class, or a particular flow or a flexi page. Now, what's interesting is if you've worked with Scratch orgs, you'll know there's the source pull and source push commands, which automatically sync the metadata you've got within your Salesforce DX project, say in VS Code, with the org that you're working with. And that's fantastic. But within sandboxes recently, you've been able to switch on what's called source tracking. And with sandbox source tracking, you can use that same push and pull command with a sandbox. And we're going to rely heavily on that in the examples I give today. Now, one of the things that got me with these commands was that the parameters or the flags that you can pass are not consistent. So if the MD API and source pull, so the older commands, they're consistent. I can say -p and I can give a name of an existing package for which I want to pull the source down for. Or I can do -k and give a package XML location. With the newer source retrieve command, I hit problems because the -p command doesn't do packages anymore. It's not package, it means path. And that's the source location of files you want to be refreshed, say force app/classes. If I want to get a package out, it's now -n. If I want to get the unpackaged source out, it's now -x. And this caught me out and I was having problems with my commands and I thought it was my understanding, but it's not. Just check the documentation. So my first attempt to take that metadata and package it was using the old unlocked packaging, which is now called org independent packaging. And in order to do that, one of the things I realized was I had to have a Scratch org that was the correct shape. And once I'd built that Scratch org with the correct shape, I realized that our production org wasn't static. So people were buying more features and more licenses. We bought knowledge, we bought live chat, we bought a new community. So my Scratch org definition file had to change to include those features if I was going to have any hope of deploying my metadata into it. So what you can do as of last year again is there's something called Scratch org shape. So within your production org that you want to be able to clone the features off, you can switch on the Scratch org shape. You can register your dev hub with that org. And even if it's the same org, you still have to do that step. It's weird, but that's the way it works. And then I can export what's called a shape file. Once I've got that shape file, I can use it to create a Scratch org. And once I've got that Scratch org, I'll have all the right features in already. So if I've got person accounts, I'll have person accounts enabled. If I've got live chat, I'll have live chat licenses. If I've got community, I'll have community licenses. I'll have all the features that I need. And then the simple matter of taking your metadata, taking that package and deploying it is at least a little bit easier. It's not perfect, okay? If we just take a small segue here on org shapes, the org shapes feature is quite cool. So if you are working with Scratch orgs and you want to be able to mimic certain environments, the ability to use shapes is a fantastic feature. So instead of having all the JSON markup on the left, which is say you have to then manually manage and change, you just have to replace everything here with source org for the org where you want to replicate the shape of it. And then you can still add on extra features if you want. So you wanted to switch on communities on top. So that's really good. If you've tried this before and you didn't have the features you wanted for Scratch orgs, do take another look because lots of new features were made available in Spring 21. So check the Spring 21 release notes. Now, metadata extracting is still very hard, but there are options that I touched on already. So I can use a package XML, and if you're using VS Code and you use the create project with manifest option, it will give you a default package.xml, but that's really one that's aimed at developers. It gives you, Apex classes and Lightning Web Components, etc. Or there is something called the Dependency Api. And the Dependency API is very useful for taking any item of metadata and seeing what depends on it and what it's dependent on. But there are some tools that already exist to make that easier. In preparing for this talk, I came across a website, a Heroku app called happysoup.io, and that will scan your org. You pick out the item you're interested in, and it will tell you that dependency map for you. There's also Ben Edwards has a org doctor app package builder, which helps you build a package XML. And there is a VS Code extension that you can use as well to create the package.xml. The other option is to use existing packages. Now, I came across this in a Pluralsight course, a free one, by Robert Soseman and Don Robbins. And what they did is they created a unmanaged first generation package in their org, because when you do that, there's this magic that happens where it picks all the dependencies for you. Yeah. Now, if you're asking yourself, why didn't Salesforce add that to change sets and second generation packaging? I don't know, but I'd love to answer that question one day of why we can't do the same thing. That's my magic button that I want. Now, if you've got multiple packages, they need a commons package. The reason for doing that is if I pull out package A and package B using this technique, and then maybe both use the same custom field on account, then it can't exist in both packages. So what you do is you create a commons package first, put all your dependencies in that they rely on, that are common across them, and then you set your packages to have dependencies on another package. Creation of that commons package is not easy, and they skip over it in the Pluralsight course because it's hard. That brings us on to our last option, which is trial and error, which is really iteration. And this is about understanding the dependency boundaries. So starting with an element and understanding the other items you need to include. And the best way to do that is iteratively. So add something, have I got enough, try, fail, okay, I'll add that. You're almost certainly here going to find you need to use techniques that I mentioned, such as dependency injection and platform events, and re-architect some of your application to get it to work. So once this is my first attempt again using Scratch orgs, I was able to pull out my org shape and metadata from my org onto my DX project. I was able to interact with my Git repo, and I was able to push it into a Scratch org eventually with some extra changes. It wasn't easy. I then wanted to create a package version, which I did eventually, took a lot of attempts. And then I had troubles installing it into my org. I had huge problems with some of the dependencies I hadn't resolved. It wasn't doing what I wanted. I ended up having to make massive changes, and I actually gave up in the end. This was too hard. But there was another option. And there's a new way that came out in Spring 21. Now, org dependent packages are still unlocked packages, but we no longer work with Scratch orgs. We're using sandboxes. Sounds like how we used to do things before DX, doesn't it? If you were on the pilot program for this was previously known as Runtime unlocked packages. And all we're doing is when we do our SFDX package create, we're using a org dependent flag as an extra parameter. When I say about using sandboxes, those sandboxes need to have source tracking enabled. That's quite important. The big change here is that when I'm doing my package create, instead of it doing all the validation that all the dependencies are there and running all my unit tests for that package, it only runs those when I install that package, which is quite good. It makes package creation and version creation a lot quicker. I also don't have to worry about my commons package anymore. I can create a package that contains an Apex class that relies on a custom object that isn't in that package. Much easier. So it's much, much quicker to build your first package, but this is not suitable if you're fortunate enough to have multiple production orgs and you need to install that package onto multiple ones. You can't use this technique. So when I want to create my environment now, I have my source org with sandbox source tracking switched on. I refresh, you have to refresh to create a new dev or dev pro sandbox, which has that source tracking feature. And then I can interact with that just like with a Scratchel with push pull commands. I can extract the source and I can create my package. So it's much, much simpler. And when I want to make my package, again, I'm pulling and pushing information from that sandbox I've just created onto my local disk, into my project. I can still use my Git repo. And when I create my package version, it's only when I install it into my sandbox and production org, only those orgs can I install it, that it will validate that it can be installed. So this was my final solution. So my happy soup with packages. So what I did at first is I created two packages. I created one for my license manager classes. So I didn't have to worry about the trial object. I didn't have to worry about my license external object. I just packaged the things that I wanted to work on where I was going to make changes. And then I created a second package for the trial manager. This was actually a mistake. I could have put this all in one package because I'm the only person working on it. But I thought this might be slicker in future. But again, I've got a Apex REST services web service here. I've got my Lightning component that's used to kick off things in the UI. And within the org, that existing metadata became owned by the package. And if I want to get rid of this, it can go back in the happy soup. So this is one of the key things with unlock packages. The happy soup can go in and out of packages over time as you wish. You're not forced as a one-way decision. And that was quite cool. Now, the way I approached this originally was as a top-down solution, and you can do that. You can say take a whole app or a whole UI interaction flow or the start of a transaction, be it a flow or an Apex trigger, or you can go bottom up. And I went for the bottom up route in the end because I wanted to work from the lowest level of what I was working from, maybe a few custom objects, then add the Apex code. And then if that's all working in my package, I can then choose if I want to include my flow in there as well. So start small and iterate. I did hit some snags on the way, and those snags were things like unsupported metadata. So things like site.com information wasn't part of the metadata I could include in the package. I also, working with my DX project, I deleted things I didn't want in the package. I thought, no, I'll take that out, it didn't work, delete, delete, delete. And what I forgot to do at first was include them in the .force ignore, which meant the next time I synced with the org, they all came back again. So don't forget to update your force ignore file. And the third thing was wait times. So the default wait time or the suggested one of 10 seconds often isn't enough, especially for a package installation. So feel free to up those wait times if you don't want to get a timeout. So just to summarize, unlocked independent packages, a very good still way of packaging your code, but really only good if you've got multiple production orgs or if you've got a particular desire to work with Scratch orgs, because it means you have to manage that entire dependency tree. For most customers, and I think Keir's talk later today, Packages for the Masses tackles this one. Unlocked or dependent, most of us in a position where we've got a single production org. We're used to working with sandboxes, and what we can now do is start to package what we want to manage outside of our soup. If you're an ISV or you've got an App Exchange app, then managed packages is still a valid option for anything you want to protect. And in my example earlier, the Commons package that I worked for the unlocked independent package, the Commons package may be something you want to do as a managed package because you might not want to allow changes to that within your different multiple production orgs. Next steps, suck it and see. You don't have to boil the ocean. So I started with a couple of Apex classes eventually, got that working, and then I added more to it. That was a much more positive experience working with something working, then breaking it, than breaking something and trying to fix it to get it working. The worst thing you can do is you just put stuff back in the happy soup. You just spent time on this. But best case is actually you've proven the benefits of doing packaging, and you can actually give evidence and a demonstration for your business case to go ahead and do more. Also, you have at least some small percentage of your metadata now in an unlocked package, so you can isolate that. And if someone breaks it in a production org, they will get warning before they break it. But if they break it in a production org, you can then just redeploy that package version that worked. So please go ahead, go forth and iterate. Screenshot time, I say Kia's talk today should be very useful. I'll be joining that one. The Happy Soup website, there's a link there for that. Bitly links for Ben Org Dr. Edwards' package XML and the VS Code extension, and then recommended Trailhead course and Developer Force article on this subject. Thank you very much. Thanks again to all our sponsors. If you'd like to ask me any questions, I'm available in the chat session. You can also reach me on the Trailblazer community or on Twitter or LinkedIn at richclark808. And throughout today, I'll be dropping in and out the Provost sponsor booth as well. Thank you very much.